So let's look at a simple serverless solution. This is a registration form where a user is going to enter a few fields about themselves and upload an image. So at the top here, we can see there's a very clear separation between what the user sees, the front end, which is this form, and the back end, which is doing the processing, which is this API service. Okay. And this API service is a fully managed service by the cloud provider. And this can do a number of things, such as it can validate the fields that the user is sending to the backend. So it can make sure that the required fields are there. It can make sure that they're in the correct format or within certain lengths. And because this service can manage that for you, it means you don't need to code that. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. The service will do that. And this service also integrates with other services to perform even more capabilities that you then don't need to program. For example, it can integrate with a firewall to provide security on the data coming in. It can integrate with an authentication system so that users can log in or use API keys. So all of this is fully managed. It's all features or two services working together. That means that you don't need to code any of it. So you can start to see how quickly you can develop a serverless solution because you're greatly reducing the coding effort involved. Now, once it gets past this API service, it's going to divide the data. It's going to send the image data to this microservice on the right, which is your image processing microservice. So here you can start to see the reusability of this architecture. So a image processing microservice that is fairly generic. This might be something that would be used by multiple applications. So you can have a shared environment where you have microservices that perform generic tasks that multiple applications can then use. Single place to manage that. So because this is a microservice, an image processing microservice, it doesn't need to integrate with a project necessarily. If you're thinking on monolithic and you write a feature, then that feature is heavily integrated with that project. It's not going to really be separated from it. But microservices can be independent, and they should be independent. And so in this case, you might pass image data in, and then you get a response out. So it doesn't need access to sensitive databases or storage facilities or anything like that. You give it a job, it gives you the result. And that makes them highly reusable. So you really start thinking in a sort of a app store kind of mentality when you're developing these microservices. On the left, we see the profile data microservice. So here you see a really good security advantage of microservice architecture, and we'll talk about this in more depth a bit later. So in a monolithic application, if any function within that entire code base needs access to a sensitive database, then you must give that access to the entire application. There's no way to separate access by function. Everything has access to it. Whereas with a microservice architecture, it's possible to give that one microservice exclusive access to that sensitive database. So that is the only microservice that has access to it. That's the only point of contact with that sensitive database. Any other microservices that need personal data must go through that microservice. So you have one point where you can have logging and auditing and ensuring that the proper authentication and that the appropriate request is being made. Much more control over that kind of access in this kind of architecture.